and we can start. Yeah, so kind of just confirmation, you guys can see the presentation. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about the objective and strategy behind the Liquid Propulsion Laboratory here at USC. And the agenda, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of what we are doing here at USC, then the objectives, so what we are trying to teach the new students and students from community colleges, and then how we are doing the strategy, so how we are making sure we are able to teach them everything we want. So LPL, so we're founded in 2015, so we are a relatively new lab, just 3 years. We are affiliated with the Huston Engineering Department here at Viterbi School of Engineering. We are a predominantly a graduate student lab, which is devoted to designing, building, and testing liquid rocket engines. We are completely student-run, so we are doing everything from budgeting from managing the team to nuts and bolts. And we are just receiving a faculty oversight in terms of safety and admin stuff. We have around 35 student members, 30 alumni from more than 10 countries around the world. And in terms of what we did already, we designed it and fabricated 4 liquid engines to date. And currently we have 1 engine under development, which we are planning to fire in next semester. So just kind of like the brief introduction, what we are doing here. And so what was the motivation to start LPL? So when employees are asking for internships or entry-level jobs, they want 10 years of experience and etc. So, but they don't want to provide that experience to you. So that's where LPL comes in. So we are providing the internship before the real internship, because nowadays the space industry is facing like the biggest challenges. Like we want to go back to the moon, go to Mars, like go to different moons around the solar system. So that's driving the requirements for the entry-level jobs and internships. So that's where we are a developing environment where people can be exposed to what it takes to be an engineer, having the exposure to the full product cycle, and being exposed to what it takes to take an idea and make it a reality, which is probably the hardest thing to do, and that's what engineers should do. So that's kind of the main motivation behind the LPL, and that's our main mission statement. Instead of being goal-driven, be more process-driven and develop the process where people can be exposed to what it takes to be an engineer. And then, so now I'm going to step through the objectives. So as I mentioned, our main objective is the workforce development. So develop the future workforce, so people after graduation can enter the space industry, or it can be any other type of industry, and can take on like the biggest challenges and solve them. So kind of like the design analysis. So we creating and maintaining 3D model in CAD system for us at Siemens NX, where we are teaching all new students how to use CAD, like why is it important, and as a documentation. So whenever we're doing like a modification, for example, to the hydro test stand, you can see on the picture. And that's usually like the first step we are teaching them. So because this is usually like the first step in the design. Then the next step is develop in-house codes, which is serving in 2 ways. Also like teaching them how to write a code. So for example, in MATLAB or Python or another language. And also it's serving as like a learning tools, because as you can see, like our code is like a nice friendly GUI, so they can easily see like what everything is in that analysis, and like in a few clicks they can see, for example, how to design like the entire liquid rocket engine, so that can help them to see like what's everything there and like what equation needs to be used and etc. And then after the 1D code, using simulation software, which seems complex at the beginning, but for example, like all these figures were done by community college students after like 3 months in LPL. So this is kind of showing that they are able to do relatively complex simulations just after 3 months, because they were able to go through the creating the CAD model, developing the 1D code where they can see like the equations, which are like in the simulation software as well, but they are kind of hidden. You're not writing them, but they can see like how it works. And then they are able to like create a relatively complex stuff without taking any class about simulation software. And then usually the last step in the design, it's creating GD&T. So they are able to create the interface between their design work they did and being able to present it to a machine shop or any outsourced supplier, and being able to get the part actually done. And this brings me to the next step, which is kind of like the fun stuff. So building and testing, where is the interface with internal, external suppliers, which seems maybe simple from outside, but being able to ask for quotes, being comfortable to ask technical questions, and just kind of making sure that like the part can be manufactured the way you want. And the one way we are like teaching new students, for example, it's giving them kind of like a reverse engineering assignments where we have test stands in the lab, and we're going to give them like a PNID, which is like a schematics of the lines, and we can give them like a certain section and reverse engineering it. So like get the quotes for all the components, making sure they're going to fit together. Call companies, ask technical questions, etc. And then when they're going to have everything, do the system integration, where usually the way we are doing it, it's through ox cleaning, which is the process you need to do for oxygen systems, where they need to disassemble everything, like to nuts and bolts, as you can see like on the picture below. Even the regulators, they need to take it apart completely, clean everything, so they can see like how all the parts are working, and then how they are working together, and then put everything together so that can help them to, because it's kind of overwhelming, as you can see like on the test stand, it's a lot of parts, but then when they can like break down everything, disassemble everything, they can get a better sense how it works together. So it's really helping, and it's a team building activity as well, because there's nothing like cleaning for like 5 hours and making sure like you know the system to nuts and bolts. And then when everything is together, they are spending a lot of time on the pre-fire testing, where they can see the system in action. There's like a proof and leak, and going through the process to how to qualify the entire system that it's safe to use. So proof and leak, making sure it can withstand all the pressures it's going to see during the testing, and then call flow and timing test as well. And then the reward at the end, yeah, it's just an example of one of the timing tests. And like all these things are done like with community college students, or like even with USC students that are just like in the lab just for a few months. So it's kind of showing like the learning curve is really steep. And then the reward at the end, the hot fires, is just they are able to develop like a legit industry tailored procedures, where when we are in Mojave, where we are testing the engines, everything is smooth. It's not like everyone just like going around and like no one knows what to do, but they are developing procedures so they know how to be safe, going through procedures like using walkie-talkies, just act professional basically, which is really important. And when you having like they are having interview for job, like that's really helping to show like that what we are doing is like on really professional level. And then the company doesn't have to spend time like to teaching you like that you need to have procedures for static firing and etc. So this everything looks perfect, but there are a lot of challenges in every student group. So these are kind of the main ones. Probably the biggest one is the rapid turnover rate. And especially for us, just 2 years, because as I mentioned, we are mostly graduate student lab. So majority of the students are spending just 2 years in the lab, and that's not a lot of time. And usually in the student teams, the most challenging work is done by seniors, or like the people who are graduating, and then they're going to graduate, and there is no one with the knowledge, and the student group can kind of go in a circles, and the lab is not growing as a whole. So it's probably the biggest and steep learning curve, because no one really has prior experience with building rockets from high school or even undergrad. So the learning curve at the beginning gets really steep. So it's really important to build up the process where they can learn what we did in 2 years, they can learn in weeks. So they can do more advanced stuff in their second semester, for example. Then help them with the lab school balance, because it's a lot of stuff. It's probably the hardest thing to do in terms of time management, because the lab is basically a full-time job, and then making sure you pass classes with good grades. So being able to help them even organize like a sessions like for homeworks doing in a lab together, so they can do the homeworks more efficiently. And then also like the goal of everyone is to get their dream job, so even have time for networking and search for a career, so having the job after they're going to graduate. So now I'm going to talk about like how we are making sure we can overcome these challenges. So these are the 6 main points we are focusing on. So it's the recruit like-minded individuals and create motivating and competitive life environment, which probably these 2 are the most important to us, and we are spending a lot of time on them. And then develop propulsion system iteratively, so being able to test a lot of time so people can see like how the system work, and it's not something that's just on a paper. And develop training tools for incoming students, which is really important, and able to overcome the steep learning curve at the beginning. Build strong and interactive alumni network, which is really important because, as I mentioned, we want to be operating as like an industry. So it's nice to get the feedback, like how actually it looks like from industry, and get the verification if the stuff we are doing, it's the right way. And then the streamline of the transition of leadership, it's really important because, as I mentioned, like the turnover of student is really quick, and being able to, so the lab is not turning like 180 degrees with every single leadership. So being able to, I mean, every leadership is going to change something, but it can be changed like 180 degrees. So it needs to have some step-by-step approach. So the recruiting like-minded individuals. So we are interviewing everyone who's joining the lab. It's not like a technical interview because, like, as I mentioned, like no one really does prior experience building rockets, and that's not what we are looking for. But it's more about getting the right mindset. So we have like an A-player mentality, which is taken from Steve Jobs. Like that's kind of what Steve Jobs like developed, and it's kind of hiring people that are like resourceful and they are able to take ownership of a project and do it with the minimal directions, and giving them the amount of responsibility. Like with higher responsibility, they're going to put more work in, and they're going to spend more hours in the lab. And even like with the community college students, which they are basically starting with like their math classes and physics classes. Even then, like we are giving them a lot of responsibility. We are still overseeing them for sure. They're not doing anything dangerous, but they are doing like the most critical projects. They are affecting like the static firing, for example. And like they always know like the big picture. So it's not like we're giving them something on a side and like, but we are giving them project that needs to be done. So if they're not going to do it, like someone else from the lab would do it. So giving them like the feeling that they are contributing to the overall goal of the lab, it's really important because that's going to motivate them, and then they're going to do a better job. They're going to learn more. And also like they create a motivating competitive lab environment. So it's come even like having like a nice environment in the lab, which is really important because whenever it looks legit, so you can see like how the lab developed in year and a half looks like. So like painting walls, like it's a nice team building. So they are like really part of the lab. It's not like a place that are just like need to go and do some work, but it's actually like a place that they want to hang out with friends. They can like just be part of the lab and really spend time that they feel part of the lab. We also, with every single member, we have like onboard meetings when they're going to join, where we are talking about the mentality in the lab, not less about like the technical stuff, which then gonna comes later, but more about like what it takes to be an LPL and like what does it mean and like what we are looking for. And we are always meeting with them like throughout the semester, making sure like they feel good and they have like friends in the lab and etc. Because if they are not feeling great in the lab, like they're not going to learn anything, they're not going to do their best. So that's probably the two main things we're focusing, like mainly, especially the leadership and like the leads of individual subsystems. They are making sure like the people are feeling good like at the place where they are. And other important stuff, which is the develop propulsion system iteratively, and the main
Oh, Hansa, I think we're
mention it. It's like test liquid propulsion because you have like 2 slides more. So I should be done like a minute.
The audio was breaking up for me. I don't know if it was for anyone else.
Okay. Is it better now?
It's fine right now, yes, but it was breaking up. That's all.
Okay. Yeah. So the other thing it's important for us is to develop propulsion system iteratively. So which means we are able to test a lot of times, because it's hard to like imagine what it is like testing liquid propulsion technology, because there's nothing you can compare it to, because it's a like no one really has prior experience with it. So that's why we're developing the learning tools in the lab. So for example, you can see like the water flow tester, which is able to like test in the lab, and like people can see like what it takes to like pressurize tank, what it takes to flow certain liquid through injector. And they can see like in first days in LPL, because for example, like the lab 2 years ago, like for example, the engine was just like sitting in a lab for a year without even like testing or anything, because we didn't have the infrastructure. So being able to have test stands in a lab, or like the learning tools, and being able so they can see the systems in action, that's really helping accelerating the process, and it's even exciting for them, and they want to learn more, and they can ask questions like when we are running those tests, and they can like shadow like the community college students can shadow the people doing when they are doing the procedures, and that's helping a lot. And it's kind of comes with the developing the training tools. So we have like a staying in the lab. So what we did in 2 years, which is usually the time we are spending in the lab as a graduate students, the new students should learn this in 2 weeks, kind of. So that's why we are spending a lot of time on developing learning tools. So for example, you can see like a simple schematics of our feed system, so they can easily see like what's everything inside, how everything works together. So that's like the Hydra mobile test stand. Then Jesse and James engines, which are pair of modular rocket engines, which they are relatively simple. So even, for example, like one community college student like redesigned the nozzle like in his like first semester in the lab, which is like crazy that the community college student without like any prior experience, like who's taking the first physics class, is able like to get like a nozzle for a rocket engine, do the analysis, making sure everything can withstand the pressures, and then actually fabricate it and implement it and test it. So that's really important for us to be able to have something that it's easily interchangeable, and they can easily design like even a small part, but then it's going to help them to understand like what's affecting what and what it takes to take something from concept to reality, because it seems simple, but things going to go wrong all the time. So that's helping them to basically figure out like what it takes to be an engineer. And the last step is like the build a strong and interactive alumni network, which is kind of even proving that like our process is the right one, or it's working. So we have alumni like in all major companies in aerospace or even outside of aerospace, and that's helping getting a feedback during our design reviews, and also getting feedback like if the process we have it's as an industry. And the last thing is the streamline of the leadership. So as I mentioned, it's important to not repeat the same mistakes. So the one thing we are doing, so the leads of the entire lab are just for 1 calendar year, and they're going to step down like for their last semester when they are graduating, and there is a new leadership. But the old leadership, it's still in the lab and kind of like mentoring them and making sure we are not repeating the same mistakes all over again. And as a conclusion, like kind of like the results we have from that. So the LPL team growth. So as I mentioned, we started with like 5 members 3 years ago, and now we have almost 40 members. Then the community college student program is working pretty well. They are getting accepted to USC as a regular undergrad students, which is pretty exciting. Then the engine development. So it's kind of serving as a verification that the system and the process we have, it's working. So we have the results in terms of having a sick rocket engine firings, and also in terms of documentation, we have conference papers, which one, it's called the Objective and Strategy Behind USC LPL, which is like talking about what I mentioned today in more detail. So feel free to check it out. It's AIAA paper, and I think I provide the link at the end of the presentation. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's what we are doing here at USC LPL.
Great.
So thank you.
You had 5 students from community colleges who spent the summer with you last summer. Is that right? Was it 5?
Yeah, I think it was 6. We started this in fall 2017 with 3 community college students for fall 17 and spring 18, and then over the summer we had 6 for 10 weeks, and this year we have 4 community college students again for the 2 semesters for the academic year. So.
And is it 2 so far who have actually transferred to USC after working at LPL?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I don't know the answer to this. I'm genuinely curious. When they transfer and they're an undergraduate, do they get to continue working with you at all, even though you guys are mostly a graduate student group?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, we are mostly a graduate student lab, but it's not a requirement. It's just kind of like how it worked out. Like we are accepting undergrads. We have, I would say 85% of the lab is graduate students, and then we have undergrads. Great. But it's not like a requirement to be a grad student. So they are still in the lab, like the community college student that they transferred to USC. They now working at LPL full time.
Great. Okay. Thank you for that. You guys, if you have questions for Hansa, you can hold them. You can actually put them in the Q&A now, and we'll hold them till the end to ask them. So I'm going to flip it over now to Dr. Messino, and Amanda Messino, and Leon Vanstone. As I said before, Leon Vanstone's at UT Austin, and Amanda Messino is at Huston-Tillotson University near Austin. It's a small HBCU. So they're going to talk a little bit about the partnership that they've formed. They've had a long-standing relationship between the two campuses, but they're modifying, converting it a little bit so that they can work on the Space Challenge rockets. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Do you have the screen? Does that look all right?
I see it.
Okay, great. So my name is Amanda Messino. I'm faculty at Huston-Tillotson University, which I am sure no one except for Leon and Christine have heard of before. We are a very small, historically Black college in Austin, Texas. We are about 1,200 undergrads. We have an undergraduate research program, though, in which we partner with larger institutions. So what I'm going to be telling you about is really about the broader program, and then I'll highlight a few things that I think would be most valuable to other schools who are seeking to develop their engagement and outreach strategies. And the first point I'd like to make is that there is a difference between outreach and engagement. And this challenge is an opportunity to reach out perhaps to students and partnering institutions that you haven't before. Engagement is the next step, where you're not just communicating something or you're trying to bring a student in or an institution in as a partner, then you develop a relationship and a partnership and you build things together. And this, one of the reasons I'm excited that Leon asked me to participate in this is because this challenge seems like a good platform for both of those, for outreach and a deeper engagement of the kind that you just heard about. So just to orient everyone to the need that we're talking about and the goal. I don't want to talk about the water too much, but overall the goal of diversity in STEM and in engineering is to have science that reflects our society, right? And right now, here are the numbers. I didn't put the gender breakdown, but 51% female, 16% African-American, Hispanic, 12% African-American, and those segments are only shifting more and more to where groups that we currently consider underrepresented minorities are going to be more and more of the population. And yet, we have this massive problem with representation in the sciences generally and in engineering specifically. 24% female, 9% Hispanic, which is, if you remember that previous slide, about half, 6% African-American, which is less than half of the proportion in the population, as of 2015, and that is all engineering fields. If you look at aerospace engineering, it's even more of a dramatic gap. As I mentioned before, the population is shifting, so your student population, by 2050, half of your traditional incoming college undergraduates, so those 18, 24-year-olds, are going to be members of underrepresented minorities, the ones that I mentioned. Plus, we're also including Asian Pacific Islanders in that underrepresented minority segment. This shift demands different responses than what we've been doing before. So there are many programs that work, but not well enough, or we're not doing enough of them. And so hopefully I'll get you thinking about some ways that you can leverage what you're doing to address this problem. One fallacy that you will often hear if you start reading about representation in STEM and in engineering is that it is a pipeline problem, that we just don't have these students. They don't exist. They are impossible to find. And the envelope keeps getting pushed back, younger and younger and younger. Well, reaching out to community college students isn't enough. You have to reach them in high school. You have to reach them in middle school. You know what? Let's just start in pre-K with talking about science. That's great. Getting that science engagement as early as you can is fantastic, but that's not the reason that we don't have representation now. And this is just one of the statistics that I like that points to that. We have a pretty good number of our underrepresented minority students who are interested in STEM fields, but they don't make it to degree. So it's not just about the pipeline, it's about the pipeline and retention and the institutional and culture change that we need to train and retain those students and integrate them into our science community. So what we do at HT, again, we're a small school, 1,200 students. We are mostly African American. We have a good percentage of Hispanics, 20%. A little under half of our students are the first generation students, so they're first in their family to seek a college degree. Many of them are Pell Grant recipients. For those of you not familiar with the federal aid structure here in the US, the Pell Grant means you have the highest possible unmet financial need for attending college. So these are our poorest students, and they are most of what we serve at Huston-Tillotson. Your typical numbers for a larger university are going to be 30 to maybe 40% of Pell recipients. So we're dealing with a very high need population, but that do reflect this unserved demographic in the sciences. We have a fairly small number of STEM majors, and the students that we're looking to tap for this particular challenge are our pre-engineering mathematics and maybe even our computer science students who might be interested in aspects of this program. The way we are going to organize this fits into a broader program we have at the university. So for the last several years, we've developed something called the STEM Research Scholars Program. This university, Huston-Tillotson, as a small liberal arts focused HBCU, did not have organized undergraduate research for this research study for the students in any of their science programs. And that might seem unbelievable, but I promise you there are schools, small institutions, liberal arts focused colleges, community colleges, small MSIs and HBCUs in and near where you are that are just like us. That they are teaching focused and they don't have the institutional knowledge or the capacity to implement these undergraduate research programs. And yet we know this is one of the most critical interventions that you can make for an underrepresented student is provide them with a research experience, provide them with something early that engages them, it connects them to the career. You're more likely to retain them into not just the degree, but that career path long-term. So this is highly needed at these institutions, and I can only imagine that they are going to be very hungry to work with you because they know that the research is important. Many of them don't have the capacity to do it themselves. The way we've organized this program is generally for STEM because, number one, we're a small school, and number two, we want to be flexible. We want to be able to work with partners in all of the STEM fields. So I've listed just a few of the institutions we have worked with to either provide internships or research experiences for students, to collaboratively develop grants, to help us develop our infrastructure and capacity at HT. Some of these are organized very much in a traditional research experience for undergraduate format. A lot of our relationships with UT Austin are like that, with departments of engineering there. So nuclear engineering has worked with us, also integrative biology, environmental engineering. So those are typically research rotations for the students. Some of the other collaborations get to be a little more in-depth, and we actually will co-write papers together, develop research projects together between the two institutions. So I'm going to give you two examples of how this works outside of engineering, just so that you understand the program, and then get into some of the take-home points that might be valuable for your programs. This is one we have set up with St. David's Foundation, which is a huge healthcare system here in Central Texas. And the important thing to note here is that this program includes scholarships for the students. So this is tuition support that lasts for the 4 years. The students come in as freshmen and they're supported throughout their time. This is incredibly important for our underserved students. Many of our students are first generation. They are going to be sending money home to their families in many cases. Many of them are low income. They are working to support themselves in college. And I don't mean that they work a few hours a semester and then over the summer. Many of them try to hold down full-time positions while they are also college students. That is the reality of the college experience for them. So if I want that student to invest some time in something that's going to be more valuable for their career than working at the local grocery store, get this research experience, I also have to make it financially manageable, because otherwise I'm taking away that student's future tuition money. I am removing their familial support by putting them in a non-paying internship or a non-paying research position. So financial support is essential for keeping these students over the long term. Overall, the other aspect of this program is mirrors a little bit of what the previous presenter was saying, that we do need to have kind of wraparound support for the students. So there's not just the project, the program itself, but mentorship and co-curricular support, experiences in and out of the lab to create that cohesion for the students, and that will be one of the factors that encourages them to stay with it. Another program we put together was with Merck Pharmaceutical, and here we decided to look at cardiovascular health disparities. This was an area where we could put in two of our majors. We could take our biology majors that were more health focused and our computer science majors, and we basically had them working on bioinformatics, on analyzing patient and provider data to figure out why certain segments of the population are more affected by cardiovascular disease. We got a really cool data set, and it was a very engaging project for our students, for our faculty. This is a continuing collaboration. This is not something that would have worked if we tried to keep the project very narrowly focused on information technology or computer science, right? So we had to be interdisciplinary, and Merck appreciated that. The aspect of your program that seems related is that you also need some multidisciplinary elements to your team, and that's something that you can leverage with small institutions that might not have departments devoted even entirely at engineering. But if they have pre-engineering, if they have mathematics, you can have students that fill some of those other roles. And this is probably not as important. This is just to point out that this undergraduate research program is not just about the student experience, it's about building something here at the university. This is more of a long-term aim. So for many of you, maybe this is after the challenge, but these programs and these partnerships become transformational when it's not just about the single student rotating through your lab or participating in the challenge. They become transformational when you develop a relationship with that other institution and you rely on their capacities as well as your own. You are the engineering experts, you are the rocketry experts, and you have the resources to break down that process in detail, to think about how to teach and learn around that. What you may not be as experienced in, and what you might not have the capacity for historically, is dealing with students who have certain types of pressures, certain types of community structures. They need support outside of the classroom. They need community, they need cohesion, they need context for what they are doing. And some of that probably is going to best come from the other institution if you can develop a relationship, because then you're learning from each other how you will learn how to work with these students. They will learn what elements of your program they need to incorporate into their curriculum so that you get better prepared students. And then it becomes a feedback loop. And you're not getting a brand new student that you need to train. You've helped that institution not just be the venue that you reach these students through, but it's helped to do some of the pre-preparation for you so that you're not starting from the first step. If you've worked with undergrads, you know there's a huge learning curve for undergrads. Anything that you can do to affect the curriculum at the other school where those students come in even a little bit more prepared. They've used MATLAB before. That's fantastic, and that will feed back, and every year it will improve. So the core elements from our program that I highly encourage you to think about for this challenge and perhaps beyond, if this becomes a way for you to maintain good relationships with these HBCUs and smaller institutions and minority serving institutions, think about the student financial support element. It might not be as important for this challenge, it might not be possible for this challenge, but it is absolutely essential going forward if you want to keep bringing in these students that are under economic pressure. Think about those partnerships. When you're working with that institution, they can learn from you, you can learn from them. And if you approach it as a relationship, then you will be strategic and you will behave as scientists and engineers who are solving a problem and building, bringing your individual expertise to bear rather than just shunting each other in particular roles. And the last aspect of that is to really consider what your co-mentoring looks like. Many of us are very well suited at being scientific mentors. We understand our areas extremely well. We've thought about how to best explain concepts. We may not have thought about the interpersonal aspects of team building. We may not have thought about broader cultural contexts and how we appear to students and how they can appear to us. That's essential. And that's something that you can work with your HBCU or MSI partner on. I feel like I'm running short on time. So your challenge advantages, what you are doing is already inherently going to be incredibly engaging, right? Research-based training, project-based learning, these are tested over and over and over again to be incredibly effective for underserved learners. And if you are approaching an HBCU, a community college, or an MSI, and they think that maybe getting involved sounds like a lot of work, or they're not sure about why they should connect with why you should be connecting with their students, remind them of this. Remind them that this is a critical element for training and retaining those students. The team-based approach can also be very effective for underserved students. It's one of the best strategies we have for underrepresented students entering health careers, pre-med. Team-based learning is how they make it through, even if they come from schools that have not prepared them well in math and chemistry. So that's built into your challenge too. This is fantastic. Again, this is a selling point, not just with the student, but with your other partners, with those institutions you want to bring in. They will respond really positive to this, and they will respond very positively if you show that you know about this. It speaks to your intentions. Considerations or challenges, team management will not take care of itself. And some of these students may need some orientation in terms of what that is like, again, not just from the scientific level, but on the interpersonal level. Who do they report to? How often should they check in? How does it impact the team if a student changes plans? This is worth a lot of discussion. And that discussion can be very generative, and it can actually cause a lot of cohesion if you have the students develop some of that team management with you. The previous presenter talked about iterating on your design. Iterate on your team structure and have that also be part of what the students do together. I mentioned the concern about mentoring, so be very deliberate and explicit in your mentor team with what the principles of mentorship you are engaging. HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, has a fantastic mentoring guide. AAAS has another. So choose a resource, train yourselves and your mentors. You might be bringing in industry experts who are fantastic in their fields. They are going to be used to working with more trained people. Even if they've worked with students, they more than likely have delivered a talk somewhere or had a job shadow. Working in a team, especially if you're bringing in underrepresented students, you need to be sure that those folks have some awareness and that you keep track of things as the lead mentors. And the last one, I would encourage you to actually write out some learning objectives. It can seem like a little bit of a pedagogy exercise, but it's really important because you don't have just the goal of completing the challenge, right? You have the goal of what you want the student to learn and what do you want the student to be at the end of the program. And if you write that out and if you survey and assess it, you will just naturally think about implementing it in ways that you might not have otherwise if you were only focused on the finish line. So think about what you want the student to know and be along the way to winning this challenge. Happy, of course, to talk about any more of this. Leon is a resource as well. He's done many kinds of science engagement and science outreach with our students. And yeah, please reach out if you have questions about any of this or even want to brainstorm about how you could structure a program or if you need connections to HBCUs in your area. We do have a pretty good network, so please be in touch.
Thank you. I just want to add to that for the Space Challenge teams. Some of you may be aware that around the time that Base 11 launched the Space Challenge, we also opened a $1.5 million grant opportunity specifically for an HBCU that wanted to start a rocketry program, and that included them getting an executive director for the program and some lab space supporting some of those efforts. So we're coming to the end of that grant cycle, and one university, one HBCU will be getting that grant, but there will be then a set of universities left over, it looks like about 7 right now, that are very interested in working in the Space Challenge in getting a program set up where they get their students exposure, hands-on exposure to rocketry. And I would be more than happy to play matchmaker with you based on geography or based on relationships you may already have with existing universities, even if they're not located close to you. So if that's something that you would like to look at, the idea of modeling a program not unlike what Dr. Vanstone and Dr. Messino have done at UT Austin and Huston-Tillotson, you can tell me on this webinar, or you can email me later, and I would be happy to work with you on making that happen. So we're into the Q&A section now. You can enter questions at the bottom of your screen. You should have an option to type in for Q&A. There are a couple typed into the chat already. That is great as well. And you can also click to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, I can go over and allow you to talk, so you can actually ask a question or share a story if you have some outreach that you're doing that you would like to also add to the conversation here. So while you guys start doing that, let me read the questions that we have from Risto. For Amanda, he says that they get their funding either from Oregon NASA Space Grant Consortium or fundraising. So what are your recommendations for other ways to get UG research funding?
Yeah, good question. I started typing. That's an excellent question. I would say that if you have the ability to make this, to make whatever you fund generally a STEM program that includes engineering as an aspect, rather than just, looking at rocketry programs or aerospace programs or NASA programs, you're gonna broaden what you can fund. So Office of Naval Research funded us very early on. National Science Foundation funded us, but again, general for STEM. We were talking about natural sciences, curriculum transformation, and undergraduate research. They have several programs that are directed towards HBCUs and MSIs. One big one is called HBCU Up, and I'll actually type that in here. They have another one called LSAMP, Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. If you are not an MSI or HBCU, but you are partnering with one, there are many avenues within those two programs, and those are just the two that come to mind. In NSF, of course, there's also the Research Experience for Undergraduates program. You can attach an REU to any NSF grant that you submit, with some exceptions. I think like the career proposals, you can't. But this provides undergraduate research stipend, housing, travel, a little bit of support for the institution, faculty member. It's a good program, and there's a track for you to apply institutionally, like you want to open up your university to a certain number of students from outside, or you can just attach one to any proposal coming out of your university as a supplement. It's a separate budget, and you can cover the undergraduate research that way, and we have a few of those, and those have been incredibly valuable. I'm trying to think of anything else. Those are the two, and then the companies. We reached out to Merck, and that was a conversation, and that became a grant proposal. Government agencies, we have Texas Parks funding. So some of the private funders will also give you general STEM funds if you talk about, what you're doing with the program over the long term.
And I'll just add to that, because I know a lot of the representatives on the line are students at the schools. But you guys, in your university, in your School of Engineering, almost all of you have someone who's an assistant dean or a title like that, who is an officer for diversity, inclusion, outreach, something in that umbrella. And they probably write a lot of grants, proposals for the work that they're doing. And there might be an opportunity for you to go to them and partner with them, because they can probably help you navigate some of this NSF and some of these bigger grant processes to get some outreach going, because you have 3-4 years for this challenge. It doesn't all have to be done this month, so keep that in mind too. There might be someone for you to partner with. We have a question here. Who would be the best contact to start a partnership with at an HBCU or community college? Example, the dean or program directors. I have an answer to that, but do you have an answer, Amanda, that you'd like to share?
for the smaller programs, so for like the community colleges and the HBCUs, definitely I would reach out to, who you can find on the website as the dean, or if they have a dedicated STEM program or STEM director. But honestly, I would also reach out directly to faculty. One of the realities of working with some of these small institutions, their websites are not always up to date. The people you contact probably have multiple roles at that university. And so you might reach out once, not hear back on the email, and you don't know if they're overwhelmed or if that person has changed. So I would reach out to all of them, the STEM director, the dean, faculty in the field. And if you're amenable to having students in a physics program, not necessarily an engineering program, reach out to those faculty too. So the engineering faculty and the physics faculty. Be broad, because the person who responds back, even if you don't think that person is exactly the right match in terms of their background and expertise, if they reach back to you and say, yes, I want to connect you with students, that's probably your best contact. That's the person who's going to go through the institutional red tape for you and get you connected in the way that you need.
I agree with that entirely. What we found in our work is that you have to get the buy-in from the high level people, the dean, so you can't ignore them, the dean, the president, whatever. Getting buy-in there is incredibly important. But the work actually happens, the rubber hits the road, usually farther down the totem pole. And so getting the excitement and the person who really wants to work with you to make the program happen usually happens at more of a faculty level or a staff level. So you sort of have to approach both of them, exactly like you said. There's another question here from Risto for USC. How do you select next year's leadership?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the previous leadership is selecting the next year leadership. So we have no like voting or anything. And this is really important because as I mentioned during the presentation, it would be a bad idea if the new leadership is going to change the way how the lab is operating by 180 degrees. And it should, as I mentioned, the previous leadership is still in the lab for their first semester of their leadership, and it's helping to make the transition smooth. So the new leadership is going to bring something new, it's going to change a few things, but the overall objective and strategy should be the same. So especially for us, be more process driven than goal driven. And it's really important that the new leadership is going to understand that, and that's the main goal. And then the lab can develop all those processes to learn new students, make them better, instead of just changing the way how the lab is operating every year or every 2 years. So that's why the previous leadership, because they know the best kind of how the lab should operate, and they have the experience, so they can, based on that, they can select the next year leadership instead of just voting and have a completely different vibe of the lab every year. This can help to maintain the same vibe and change, just tweak small things, but in the long run then lab can build the process, and it's just going to be probably the most important, be process driven and goal driven, and spending time, communication is the key in this process. So being able to communicate all the issues we did, as I did as a lead, so they're not gonna redo all those things. So that's why there's no voting, but it's more just leaders to leaders kind of conversation, which is really important to us.
Great. Leon, do you have anything you want to add to that?
In terms of selecting leadership, it can be a tricky one, and as was discussed, you do need continuity between each. You can't flip the organization. At the same time as well, people can sometimes feel that simply selecting the next person that comes up can be a little unfair. It really depends upon the organization. It's one of those things that you can often sort of let grow naturally. It's not a problem that anyone has right now. And so, in a year's time after your organization forms of something, you can think about, as that happens, how do you transition in a way that makes sense for your organization? And you can grow that idea quite naturally. So that's something to bear in mind. You don't have to have the entire ins and outs of your entire org worked out now. You can deal with problems as they come up.
Awesome. I have a question for you guys about how you measure the effectiveness of your outreach programs? How do you know it's doing what you want it to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a few things you need to measure, I think. The easiest is to just numbers, right? Keep track of how many people you've contacted and the nature and depth of the outreach. So if we're doing more community-facing events where we're just trying to recruit and bring people in, then it's, well, how many attended, how many followed up? So that's super simple. Those are just your sort of attendance numbers. But then for the next level, it's not that difficult to track things in an extended program through some sort of assessment. And you can do simple little things. If you are going to a community college class to give a talk, and your goal with that talk is to get some of the students to then apply to your program. So those are some of your numbers, right? How many were there? How many did go ahead to apply? But you could also incorporate a really short cell phone-based survey there's several free apps where you just have a few questions about how the student feels about a science career now that they've heard about your path. And this is a really easy thing to do. You can just incorporate that at the very end. Sometimes adding that, like adding a little step where students will give you feedback, you're going to get some questions and some follow-up that you might not have otherwise gotten, because sometimes students are going to be shy about asking that question in front of the big group. So little things like that. Once you have the program going and you have the challenge going, then I would say that should become a little more in-depth. And if you're keeping track of your team and their metrics and how they're doing with their engineering challenge, also incorporate an assessment, a self-assessment and a team assessment that asks them about how they are grasping your particular identified core concepts that are important to the project, right? And that's a part of the reason for going through that learning objectives. When you're setting up your team and you're setting up your program, think about what you want them to learn, and then that's what you check in with them along the way on a regular basis on. Online, it can be really simple. It can be a Google Doc, but you can't take it for granted that they'll speak up. You have to incorporate that into the way you run the teams.
Awesome. I was also curious what you guys think about a realistic time frame from how long should a team expect to take from when they start conceptualizing what an outreach program might look like until they actually have students there in the program? I'm sure it varies.
Yeah, who's that to?
All of you.
Okay. Oh well, I'll speak a little bit then. I mean, yeah, it really can vary. If you have someone that's really engaged on the other end, then it can be very quick. It can be you have a conversation with somebody in your lab next week, as long as the facilities are allowing. And that can be a really big problem, actually, as institutions can really struggle to find a way bureaucratically to allow you to do some of the things that personally everybody is willing to do. So, for instance, if we want to have HT students come to the UT lab, how do we do that? How does it, what's that arrangement look like? What status does that HT student have at UT? Are they also affiliated in some manner? Because they often need to be insured. They need to have all these other things in place, which can really make it a bit difficult. But again, if you can find those right people who really do care about this, then things can happen very quickly. But there are things that it can be really difficult to achieve, and you end up struggling a lot through it. And sometimes things can really take quite a long time for programs to build to sort of the size or arrangement you might like. And in doing so, you often have to perhaps sort of take it in baby steps, do smaller things, maybe have people come in for smaller, summer placements or something and things like that. So that would be my 2 cents on the whole idea.
Yeah. And as was mentioned earlier by I think all of us, you don't need to have all aspects of this decided before you contact these other organizations, the other schools. So decide on your target, right? How many underrepresented minorities would be the ideal for your team? If your team is 50, then how many, what's your goal? Set a good goal that really addresses this. Decide on your initial group of people you're going to reach out to and start contacting them, but also give them the opportunity to feedback. You don't have to have the whole thing figured out before you reach out to them. If you give them the opportunity to feedback and give you input on how you actually run aspects of the program for their students, they're going to be so much more interested in being involved with you, and they'll help smooth some of that stuff that Leon mentioned, right? These like annoying institutional things like, oh, whose insurance policy? And you just need to get the right people talking to each other, but it is a pain to have to deal with that. If you have good buy-in at the other institution, they will help with that too.
Yeah, I can talk about like how, not like, but how to like integrate those community college students like to the lab and do the actual work. And, like in LPL, like it's really fast paced, so I would say this can take like weeks. And as I mentioned, we have the learning tools, so they can be like easily implemented to the lab like in weeks. Or like in terms of like the previous question was like how we are measuring that like the outreach program is doing its job. Like for us, I mean, one thing is that they are getting accepted to USC, which is a good way to measure things, and they are able to transfer to USC or any other like good university in California. And the other, like I think the 2 community college students we have this year just like joined the lab just based on the recommendation of the students that were here the year before. So that's kind of serving as a good feedback as well. And even we have some like previous community college students that they didn't go through our like the outreach program, but they transferred to USC like completely like independently of LPL, but then they joined LPL just based on the recommendation because they went to community college student with a student who went through the internship program. So this is kind of serving as like a good feedback loop, because like people always like, yeah, like the guy who was here like last year just like recommended me LPL. It's like the place to be. So this is like serving as a good feedback as well.
Definitely, the word of mouth feedback is huge. All right, I'll do a last call for the participants. If you have any questions or if you want to share something that you're doing at your campus with outreach, please go ahead, enter that question, or click the button to raise your hand and I'll allow you to talk. I have one last question for the panelists. How do you have any advice on finding a good partner? How do you decide what school would be good to work with?
I don't think I can really answer the question because I'm not like really involved in that process as a student, so I'm standing by.
Yeah,
I mean, proximity helps a lot. That's, we're really lucky here with Austin. In Austin, HT is like less than a mile from UT, so that proximity does a lot for us in terms of the students moving back and forth. So I would say use geography a bit and look for your local institutions. Again, even if they're not the perfect fit in terms of the capacity, the training of their faculty, but if the students are physically there, that's going to help so much more than you think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm certainly USC is fortunate in a big urban area. There are a whole bunch of community colleges, and I know certainly Base 11 feels that there are tremendous untapped resources within the community colleges in terms of the students there. There are a lot of first-generation students. So we think that's a great place to do outreach, certainly from our perspective. And then as the HBCUs, the HSIs are other institutions that are excellent ones to partner with for outreach programs with undergraduates. So I don't see any more questions here. So I'm just going to thank you guys, our panelists, so much for taking the time today and sharing your stories. And I hope that this is really just the beginning of some more conversations that the teams have amongst each other and with Base 11 and hopefully with you guys as well about how to get some outreach programs up and running. So thank you guys, and this has been recorded and we will share it, so if your colleagues didn't get a chance to tune in today, they can watch it later. So thank you guys. Have a good Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.